I found out many things by asking God questions. I could never reconcile for years a loving God with the God who would eternally let somebody be tormented. I struggled with that for years until one day God revealed to me the answer. And then later on, I met other people who had the same understanding. And I think one of our biggest problems is that we believe what we've been taught. And if you believe what you've been taught and you've been taught wrong, it's pretty hard to get out of that. Because even if you're raised a communist, I often say that if you were raised, here's a good example of us judging by the flesh. If you were raised in the culture and under the auspices of Osama bin Laden, and you were raised and you were reared and you were trained up underneath that consciousness and that mindset, you very well may have flown those planes into the two towers. Very possible. So that's a very good example about judging according to the flesh. Those men were only doing what they believed. How could you get anybody to blow themselves up? I mean, to us, it's unthinkable. But from a child, as you're raised that way, and you're taught that way, and you have these beliefs in your mind of what the rewards you're going to get for doing that, then you probably would have blown yourself up too. So we must stop judging the world by the flesh, by what we see. Because when we do that, that doesn't mean that we don't, the people must pay. If you go against the laws of God and man, we must perhaps lock you away somewhere, but we still can minister to you according to what we know the truth is. We can minister through the seed of his life that's in you. And if our prisons and institutions were like that, people all over the world would be set free from those places. One of our books got into, I have a book out there called Coming Out of Condemnation, and that got into a mental institution, and a person just by reading that book was restored whole. Because really that's all of our problems, is we're operating out of the wrong mind. All of us, if you're not operating out of the mind of Christ, you are out of your mind. If you're operating out of the carnal mind, you are out of your mind. And when you're operating out of the mind of Christ, that is when you will begin to experience all of these things that you know we should be experiencing. I'm going to close for now. Isn't it wonderful that we have young people today that are just so alive? And they're, I don't know, the children, many of them that are being born today, there's even children being born today who never have lost consciousness of where they came from. I tell you, there's a new breed arising on this earth. Some of us who have been on the earth a little longer, it seems it takes us a little longer to really have an understanding of these spiritual things. But some of these children, they just, it's like they're born with the knowledge. It's a wonderful thing. Well, we started talking this morning about our spiritual potential. And what is that? That is unlimited. That is eternal. That is unending. You will never come to a place where you can say it's all over. Is God always and forever expanding? Well, so are you. We are such a blessed people to be on this earth in these days, to have these seals that I began to talk about this morning, to begin to have these seals broken in us. It's a most wonderful experience when all of this stuff that you know begins to manifest in your life. And it is so easy when God opens your eyes, because you realize, as we said this morning, that a seed of corn or a flower or anything, that you could, anything that you plant in the ground that's a seed, there is no effort for that seed to reproduce. It's a life law. It's the law of that life. And that's why the Apostle Paul said that the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made us free from the law of sin and death. So the key to experience is to get into that life law. You see, most of us have been in the law of sin and death because we still live out of this carnal mind. Even as Christians. I mean, does anybody, some of you may, but do we have the boldness to stand up and say, I am come that you might have life? I can guarantee you, I know that's why I'm on the earth. I am here, not speaking out of a human consciousness, but speaking out of a spiritual identity. We are here to reproduce Christ in a people. That's our function. See, we have great potential. And one of the things that has held us back is the concept we have about Jesus. And I'm not saying it's a correct, it's not an incorrect, but we look at Jesus as though he is something that we could never be. Well, we know we could never. You see, in a human being living in a human consciousness, no matter how much you want to be like that, it is absolutely impossible. It'd be like taking a dog and having a dog live by a human life. You cannot. You see, we could teach that dog. We could dress him up real nice, and we could teach him till the end of his days how to live like a human. And he can't. He's a dog. He has the life law of a dog. He'll bark and he'll, do all those things. But that's his life law. Well, you see, the two men that we talk about, they have two different life laws. And as long as you're living out of this human consciousness, as long as you're trying to teach the human to be like a God, you'll simply hinder his progress. We should never teach a human how to be like Jesus, because for a human, it's absolutely impossible. We have to get into another life law. You see, if you try to fly, I used to dream when I was a kid about what it would be like to fly. But if you get up on a building and jump off, honey, the law of gravity is going to bring you down. But if you get into another law, if you get into the law of lift, if you get into an airplane, you will be lifted into the heavenlies. Now, if you get into the law of the Spirit of life that's in you, then you will be lifted above the law of sin and death. Never again will you have to try to be good or do the right thing. It's a life law. You see, Jesus could only do that was his Father's will to do, because he knew who he was. Well, and because of what we've been taught, that Jesus was born of a virgin, that makes him definitely not like me. I was not born of a virgin. And he was one who was absolutely sinless and separate from sinners. He never sinned, couldn't sin. He was a perfect Son of God. That gives us an image that we could never be like that. And he had the advantage because he had the virgin birth and he was sinless. But we haven't realized that we also had an incorruptible, indestructible birth in this earth. You see, he was not the only one that was born without sin. Now, I'm not talking about the human here. I'm talking about the Spirit of the living God that is planted in this earthen vessel at birth.